Republican war on voting rights has got to end. We are coming to you live from Selma, Alabama. This is Progress Presents on Sirius XM, Progress 127.
Good evening. This is the Professor Dr. Ron Daniels in studio in New York. And now we go live to Selma, Alabama with our host for Progress Presents, Mark Thompson.
Thank you, Dr. Daniels. Dr. Ron Daniels in our studio in New York. Dr. Daniels, President of the Institute of the Black World, sitting in the studio introducing me. He would normally be here in Selma, but regrettably could not be here today. It's an honor for me to be here with you on this evening. We're live from the Dallas County Courthouse. And for anyone listening in our listening audience who saw the movie Selma, you know exactly where that is. And this is the place where people were denied the right to vote, and the place where the Reverend Dr. C.T. Vivian and others were beaten right in front of this courthouse. So this, like the bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge we marked across today in our annual Bridge Crossing Jubilee in Selma, this is also a place where blood was shed. How's everybody doing this evening? You are listening live here on Sirius XM Progress 127, and also watching on live stream. You can go to breachrepairs.org, right, Eric? Yes. And link on the live stream. Also, go to Facebook, Repairs of the Breach. Go to Facebook, Make It Plain, MIP, and you can see it as well. We're all here with a very, very distinguished group of people to talk about voter fraud being a lie. And the real truth is about voter suppression. No matter what Donald Trump says, no matter what he makes up, we know what the truth is. And what better place than to do it here right at the scene of the crime, right here at the Dallas County Courthouse in Selma, Alabama. We have a program we're going to follow. I'm going to introduce you to our panelists in just a little while. But first, the man who has convened us all, and what an incredible job he has been doing over the past number of years with Moral Monday, starting with Moral Monday, the state conference president of the North Carolina NAACP. He was just honored moments ago in our first annual Bridge Awards ceremony. He's the first recipient of what will now be the annual Bridge Award because he embodies everything that Selma has been about. The spirit of our ancestors in Selma is infused in him. And, you know, he had the courage even today to live up to that. We were at Brown Chapel AME when the Secretary of State of Alabama, John Merrill, stood up and tried to rationalize this lie of voter fraud and voter ID. And Reverend Barber stood up and said, no, in the middle of the pulpit, in the middle of the church. Some folks think you're supposed to be all quiet and reserved, and, you know, some folk probably even want to go back to gloves, you know, the white gloves in church. But Reverend Barber, like me, he and I are probably more, what's the term, Baptist-costal? Yeah, something like that. That's Baptist, kind of, in other words, the whole African experience of spirituality, Dr. Jeffries, is what is infused in us. So we're not just going to sit, and Reverend Barber said, you can't do that in church. So that's exactly what you're supposed to do in church. When somebody comes in, a no-good Secretary of State, telling a story like that, we're in Alabama, and I'm just so glad. The Lord works in mysterious ways. Speaking of spirits, Coretta Scott King's spirit is all over. She wrote that letter about no good, Jeff Sessions, and now he is getting it. He'll probably be gone by the end of the week. But the real reason he should be gone is because we know what he has been doing to help suppress our votes, setting us back to pre-1965. 1865, we're free. Lost the right to vote by 1880. Took until 1965 to get it back. And that's the struggle that we have been dealing with. So without further ado, just to set the tone and set the message, I'm just your moderator tonight, but we're going to hear from some outstanding panelists I can't wait to introduce. But first and foremost, the leader of Moral Monday and Forward Together and Repairs of the Breach, and the president of the North Carolina State Conference of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. Please welcome the Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II.
Hello, Selma. Hello, America. Let's give it up for Mark Thompson. and our panelists here today. I want to take a moment and set the tone as repairers of the breach, along with Senator Hank Sanders and Fire Rose and the group here are sponsoring this event. But before that, because we're in a movement, and the Bible declares in the book of Kings that you really cannot have prophetic truth until you have prophetic singing, that the minstrel must set the atmosphere in order for there to be a true word of prophetic truth. So there is a lady here. Her name is Reverend Cheryl Uzzell. She has served for years as a psych nurse. Some people say she had to do that to get ready to deal with her pastor. She's the assistant pastor of a 130-year-old congregation founded by former slaves, where I pastor, a graduate of Duke University, and she's traveled the world, been to South Africa. She's going to lift a song for us right now to set the atmosphere. Can you all welcome the Reverend Cheryl Uzzell?
Good evening. If there ever was a time that we need to keep our eyes on the prize and hold on, it's now. So I'm going to begin singing this, and at any point that you want to jump in with me, that'll be just fine. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on. Hold on, hold on, keep your eyes on the prize and hold on. There's just one thing that we've done wrong. We've been silent just a little too long. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on. Hold on, hold on, and keep your eyes on the prize and hold on. The blood cries out, what have you done? It's time to fight, it ain't no time to run. Just keep your eyes on the prize and hold on. Hold on, hold on, keep your eyes on the prize and hold on. Hold on, hold on, keep your eyes on the prize and hold on. Got my hand on the justice plow, wouldn't take nothing for my journey just now. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on. Hold on, hold on, keep your eyes on the prize and hold on. One last time, join me. Hold on, hold on, keep your eyes on the prize and hold on.
I'm glad. Let's give it up for Reverend Uzzell and hold on. Tonight we're gathered here for this symposium entitled Voter Fraud is a Lie, Voter Suppression is Alive and Well. It's time for full restoration of the Voting Rights Act. And this week we penned a letter, was signed by a number of clergy and lawyers, Penda Hair, Senator Sanders, and we sent it to Jeff Sessions declaring a demand. And that is that as the Attorney General of these United States, we invited him to come here And we said if to come here and make it clear where he stands on restoration of the voting rights. In fact, we demand that he stand for full restoration and call on the Congress to do so. Because the Justice Department is not supposed to be adversarial to voting rights. In less than 24 hours, Penda, more than 4,000 faith activists across this country, 500 clergy of all different faiths have signed on to that letter. And not only are they signing on just as a letter, they're signing on making a commitment that if we do not soon see full restoration of the Voting Rights Act, then it's time for us to take the movement from Selma and North Carolina to the halls of Congress, even if it means sitting in the office of Ryan and Boehner, and McConnell, and the Department of Justice. We cannot allow history to record that 52 years after the Voting Rights Act was passed, we who were the recipients of that act now live in a time when we have less voting rights protection than we had when they first won after walking across that bridge in 1965. That is a tragedy within our democracy. I want our listening audience to understand this historical moment. Right outside of this courthouse, there were battles and beatings and blood and newspaper records that went all over the country that created the kind of creative tension. Lyndon Baines Johnson didn't want to pass the Voting Rights Act. The Congress didn't want to deal with it, but they came to Selma, standing on years and years of work even before the march from Selma to Montgomery, and they came to make the nation do what was right. And it cost many lives. And that blood that was shed, that blood is speaking from the ground. If you listen real well in the spirit, you can hear it. If you get real quiet, you can hear it. If you stand in some of these places, you can hear the blood crying, saying, America, what have you done? But it's also crying, and if the blood is crying, then surely we can't be silent. On first Sunday in March 1965, TV networks interrupted their regularly scheduled programming to show armed officers, actually thugs who had been just recently deputized, on horsebacks chasing and beating unarmed Americans on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. Bloody Sunday shocked the nation, exposing the extremism of Congress's Jim Crow caucus, which had resisted the expansion of voter rights for nearly a century. 52 years later, America is reeling from the political extremism unleashed by the first election in a half a century without the full protections of the Voting Rights Act. In the midst of our present crisis, the blood of Selma's martyrs cries out as clearly as in 1965. America cannot suppress the vote of any one group without hurting everyone in this democracy and undermining the very cause of progressivism. Now, Bloody Sunday is memorialized in history books and cinema as a great turning point in America's civil rights movement. The struggle for voting rights in Alabama did not begin, however, when Dr. King came to town, nor when the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee came to town and sent organizers to Selma 2 years earlier. The local Dallas County Voters League inherited its insistence on the right of African Americans to vote from ancestors who remembered the ratification of the 15th Amendment following the Civil War, when during the time of Reconstruction, Southern legislatures, blacks and whites working together, passed laws to guarantee all people, including African American men, the right to vote. Frederick Douglass said, slavery is not abolished until the black man has the right to vote. And I would like to update that and say this democracy is not just until every tool is used to stop voter suppression. Even though Jim Crow laws regulated our foreparents to second-class citizenship, black people in Alabama remembered that the promise of Reconstruction meant little without the right to vote. Throughout the South in the late 1860s and 1870s, black Lincoln Republicans, unlike the GOP today, voted with local whites to elect progressive state legislatures that challenged corporate interests, expanded public education, and sought criminal justice reform. These coalitions were violently attacked by the Klan. Many of the Klan's job was first to attack white people who were working with black people. But they also faced a relentless propaganda campaign from Southern Democrats who accused black and white legislators of stealing elections through voter fraud. Now this is in the 1800s they were talking about fraud. After the end of the Reconstruction in 1877, unfounded accusations of voter fraud became the basis for literacy tests, poll taxes, and other voter suppression taxes. Though challenged in the courts under the 15th Amendment, Jim Crow voting laws were upheld for decades because they did not deny the franchise based on individual race. They said, we're not doing this based on race, we're doing it based on money. And plus there was a very extreme Supreme Court that had been put in place in the 1800s and on through the 1960s. But after Selma, the Voting Rights Act recognized that their intent and the effect was suppression of African American votes and the destruction of black and white progressive coalition that not only brought black power, but brought power to a progressive civil rights movement. Now, we cannot make sense of President Trump's unsubstantiated claim of 3 to 5 million illegal voters he claims in last year's election. Of course, they are all urban, which is a code word for black. Voter fraud, though proven to be statistically irrelevant in modern election, has been the primary justification for voter suppression bills in 22 states since the Supreme Court stripped the Voting Rights Act of its power in 2013 with the Shelby decision that came out of Alabama. Though it is the responsibility of the Congress under the 15th Amendment to guarantee voting rights to all Americans, they have failed for more than 1,349 days. Nearly 4 years, the Congress has engaged in what Dr. King said about George Wallace, interposition and nullification. Like their 19th century forebearers, today's extremists are using the lie of voter fraud to justify voter suppression. In North Carolina, there was an ominous voter suppression bill. Penda would talk more about it, but it was a bill that was passed in less than 2 months after Shelby. It wasn't just about photo ID, it was about rolling back all of the provisions from same-day registration to early and on. But we just won the case in the 4th District where the federal courts unanimously ruled, 2 white judges and 1 African American, that it was in fact surgical racism. Not just racism, but surgical racism. The Texas voter ID bill, which Attorney General Sessions' Department of Justice has just refused to challenge before the Supreme Court, that bill in Texas attempts to establish a 21st century poll tax, discriminatory in both intent and effect, even if it doesn't name black and poor people as its target. And right here in Alabama, your Secretary of State has been the author of a voter ID bill that the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, led by Sherlyn Ifill, is suing right now because that bill, it has suppressed more than 100,000 voters in Alabama. The real fraud in America is the 2016 election. And the real fraud in the 2016 election was not individuals voting twice or out of precinct or not being citizens, but the rigging of representation through voter suppression and racialized gerrymandering. For instance, in my state, Republicans won 9 of 12 congressional districts in North Carolina, even though they received less than a majority of the total congressional votes in 2016 because of apartheid-type redistricting. The districts they won, as well as North Carolina state legislative districts, have been declared unconstitutional, racially gerrymandered. But their party still controls the Congress and the State House because we're still working through the courts to may go up to the Supreme Court. And what we know is that there is this sinister, and it is sinister, a sinister lie about voter suppression, voter fraud, because there are those that do not want to face the truth about voter suppression. And the voter suppression doesn't just hurt black people, it's targeted at black people. but it hurts brown people and white people, and it hurts the LGBTQ community. It hurts poor working people, because if you elect extremists, you cannot get progressive public policy. We now have a Congress that wants to roll back the Affordable Care Act because many of them have been elected through racially gerrymandered districts. If the districts were fair, they wouldn't even get elected. In this past election, there were 868 less voting sites in the black community. That's the most underreported story of this past election. In this past election, before the Russians hacked the system, our system was hacked by racism and voter suppression and gerrymandering. That's why we're here tonight. We're here tonight because we had 25 debates in the presidential election, the primary and the general election, and not one debate, Democrat or Republican, was held on restoration of the Voting Rights Act and where you stand on restoring the Voting Rights Act. And if you undermine voting in a democracy, you have undermined that democracy. Now, 52 years ago, Americans were stunned by the footage of Bloody Sunday, and they heard Sheriff Jim Clark shout, "Get those GD niggers," and "Get those GD white niggers." That's what Jim Clark said. And that was heard. As in the Reconstruction, white and black people came together in Selma to say that you cannot suppress the right to vote. And after the Selma to Montgomery March, the Alabama state legislature passed a bill declaring that the marchers were just out of control sex addicts.
That's right, sure did. That happened.
And Jim Clark wrote his memoir, and the title of his memoir was The Raping of Selma. And he declared that those who fought against voter suppression and fought for Voting Rights Act had raped the South. Now, Martin Luther King pressed President Johnson, and he had to go out and make him do it. My friends, we are in the middle of a battle for the soul of this democracy. Voter fraud is a lie. Voter suppression is alive and well. And we must fight now for the full restoration of the Voting Rights Act and the restoration of Section 5 preclearance as just a baseline, because without it, we have unleashed these state legislatures and these governors to pass voter suppression and racially gerrymandered laws, the likes of which we have not seen since Jim Crow. That is why we cannot merely come and commemorate. I heard Hank Sanders say it best. We have to come here to remember so we can leave here to fight. We come here to stand on the shoulders, but not so we can see and be strong. But I think it was Miss Boyd that said, you get off my shoulder and fight and get to work. It is time for all freedom-loving people to get to work, and we are making a call to clergy, rabbis, Christians, Jewish, Sikhs, Hindus, Buddhists, and other people of faith and people who may not be religious, but they believe in a moral universe. We're going to have to take the fight to Congress, because if we do not fight for the full restoration of the Voting Rights Act, we have no business calling the names of those who died to win it in the first place. That is why we're here tonight.
Reverend Dr. William J. Barber. Repeat after me. Voter fraud is a lie.
Voter fraud is a lie.
Voter suppression is alive.
Voter suppression is alive.
Voter fraud is a lie.
Voter fraud is alive.
Voter suppression is alive.
Voter suppression is alive.
All right, so we're underway. Before we introduce our panelists, I believe now we're going to watch a video clip One of our two of our panelists that are supposed to be here are in this clip. One of them is going to join us via phone. The other one may join us a little later if her plane lands on time, Sister Joanne Reed. But first we want to hear this clip, the conversation between Joy. How many of y'all love Joanne Reed? Isn't she wonderful? And she's speaking with Ari Berman, a columnist for thenation.com and the author of Give Us the Ballot, The Modern Struggle for Voting Rights in America. So we're going to let you all see this clip, and then we're going to introduce Ari and our other panelists. Can we roll the clip, please?
Why should Americans trust you when you accuse the information they receive of being fake when you're providing information that's not accurate?
Well, I was given that information. I've seen that information around.
One of Donald Trump's false claims about the election was exposed at his Thursday press conference, just days after his policy advisor, Stephen Miller, doubled down on yet another one of those false claims about widespread voter fraud. Now, we're still waiting to see what comes out of Trump's proposed federal investigation into so-called voter fraud, which he recently said would be led by Vice President Mike Pence. But that hasn't stopped states from taking their own action to limit voting rights. According to the latest numbers from the Brennan Center, as of February 1st, 21 states have introduced at least 46 bills to restrict access to voting. And joining me now, senior contributing writer for The Nation, Ari Berman, and Sherilyn Ifill, president and director counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Thank you both for being here. And Ari, can you just go through with us what are sort of these laws, or the sort of the general gist of these laws that are being passed?
So we saw this year already, we're seeing that, as you mentioned, there's 46 bills in 21 states to make it harder to vote. So things like strict voter ID laws, getting rid of same-day registration, cutting back on early voting, eliminating the number of polling places, purging the voting rolls. And this is on top of the fact that we just came out of the 2016 election, where it was the first presidential election in 50 years without the full protections of the Voting Rights Act. And 14 states already had new restrictions in place. So we're putting restrictions on top of restrictions here.
Yeah, and Sherilyn, this is what Stephen Miller had to say to George Stephanopoulos last Sunday in justifying this idea that we need to have this war on voter fraud.
You have provided absolutely no evidence. The president has made a statement.
The White House has provided enormous evidence with respect to voter fraud, with respect to people being registered in more than one state, dead people voting, non-citizens being registered to vote. George, it is a fact, and you will not deny it, that there are massive numbers of non-citizens in this country who are registered to vote. That is a scandal.
You know, I'm sitting here holding the Brennan Center's report on non-citizens. Non-citizens are not registered to vote. That's not true. But that kind of an argument is what's being used to justify these restrictions.
Well, in your earlier segment, Joy, you talked about the president asking people to ignore what they see. In the context of voter fraud, this is where the president and his advisors are saying, even though you don't see it, it exists. I mean, you just heard a senior policy advisor to the president of the United States say something patently untrue, that the White House has produced enormous evidence of voter fraud. You and I know that the White House has produced no evidence of voter fraud, and that's because the evidence of voter fraud is infinitesimal and has been studied over and over again by the Brennan Center and others who have demonstrated that there is no such thing as widespread voter fraud. What there is voter suppression that has been found by federal courts, not liberal federal courts, but by federal courts. So you have a president of the United States, you have Sean Spicer, the press secretary, you have Stephen Miller, a senior policy advisor, all advancing a patent untruth, a lie, that there is widespread voter fraud, that 3 to 5 million illegal votes were cast in the 2016 election. Not true. And at the same time, entirely ignoring the reality of voter suppression, which is a real threat to our democracy, the deliberate effort to disenfranchise African American and Latino voters in states throughout this country. And as Ari pointed out, the fact that the administration is ignoring all of that has allowed states to double down and to begin to think about building in increased voter suppression efforts on top of the voter suppression efforts we were already challenging and actually prevailing over in federal courts.
And we're already seeing the impact of Trump's lies about voter fraud. So they claim that all of these people are illegally busing to New Hampshire from Massachusetts. There's no evidence of this, but right now there are 40 bills in New Hampshire that would make it harder. 40 bills in one state alone, trying to get rid of same-day registration, trying to make it that you have to pledge that you're going to live in the state for the indefinite future to be able to vote there, which would disenfranchise college students and others, making that you have to register your car and get an in-state driver's license to be able to register to vote. This is crazy what they're doing.
So we're really in this moment where we should be looking at the way in which these kinds of claims, this kind of insistence on the idea of voter fraud and the effort to suppress minorities from participating fully in the political process really threatens our democracy, really goes to the core of who we are. This is an existential moment, and I think it's incumbent upon Republicans and Democrats, but mostly incumbent upon average people to recognize and to wake up and to realize this is not ceremonial. It's not about crossing the bridge and laying a wreath. This is about continuing to fight for the democracy and continuing to fight for the rights of African Americans and Latinos to be full citizens of this country. That's really what's at threat when this kind of stalking horse is put out there. And if this executive order happens, calling for a nationwide voter investigation, people need to have their eyes open and be aware of what this will unleash on the country.
Tonight, a Trump administration official telling CNN that the president could open an investigation into his claims of voter fraud as early as tomorrow. Let's discuss now. CNN political commentator Van Jones, a former Obama administration official, joins us. Nice job, by the way, Van. Political commentator Jeffrey Lord, who was a political director in the Reagan White House. You did okay, Jeffrey. No, you did very well, thank you. And Reverend Dr. William Barber, president of North Carolina NAACP, who always does a great job. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us this evening. Jeffrey, the president is calling for a major investigation into voter fraud. Tonight he spoke with ABC News with David Muir. Listen to this.
What you have presented so far has been debunked. It's been called false.
Take a look at the Pew reports.
I called the author of the Pew report last night, and he told me that they found no evidence of voter fraud.
Really? Then why did he write the report?
He said no evidence of voter fraud.
Excuse me. Then why did he write the report?
So
according to Pew report, then he's groveling again. I always talk about the reporters that grovel when they want to write something that you want to hear, but not necessarily millions of people want to hear or have to hear.
So you've launched an investigation.
We're going to launch an investigation to find out, and then the next time, and I will say this, of those votes cast, none of them come to me. None of them come to me. They would all be for the other side. None of them come to me. But when you look at the people that are registered, dead, illegal, and 2 states, and some cases maybe 3 states, we have a lot to look into.
Okay, this is a very, very important discussion. All right, so I want us to be honest about this, because I think people are relying on us, obviously they are, for the truth. Members of his own party have shut this down. His own attorney said there's no fraud or mistake in 2016. Why does he insist on the author of the study has been on this network? He spoke with David Muir, said there's no evidence
there's
of it.
more than this study. There's plenty of evidence, right? I'm looking right now at the Heritage Foundation, sampling of election fraud cases from across the country. 742 sampling now, 742 criminal convictions, 462 cases. And this is all across the country. And they have the names of the individuals, what they were convicted for, when they were convicted, et cetera. My point is, let's find out. Because the answer is, we don't know how many.
Okay, fine. I think people want to know that.
Yeah.
Even with what you're saying, it does not say thousands, 3 to 5 million. Millions of illegal.
The key word here,
millions
Don,
of illegal votes.
The key word was sampling. This was just a sample.
But wouldn't a sampling say instead of 100 or 700, what did it say?
Don, we
millions?
have no idea. That's the point. Is that the people started saying we have no idea how much of this there is.
Well,
and so I'm saying let's find it out. Let's find it out.
I want to hear from the biggest expert on this whole thing is on this. When you're talking about voter suppression, voter
Dr.
fraud,
William Barber.
It's Dr. William
Who
Barber.
dealt with it. You dealt with it, not only Dr. Barber during this election cycle, but you have dealt with it for many years. Go on.
Now, we've been fighting ever since. Jeffrey, call yourself Lord, but their last name is Lord. But come on, brother. Listen, we know the guy you're talking about, Vaughn's, but he's been proven to be fraudulent. They brought him to North Carolina, and his claims were the same claims Republicans used in North Carolina to justify the worst voter suppression law. And the courts ruled against them, said they had engaged in surgical voter suppression. That's the issue. 22 states since 2010, 2 years after Obama won, have passed voter suppression voter suppression. 15 states since 2013. We're talking about states where you had some of the highest turnout of African Americans and Latinos, where Republican-led legislatures went in and did voter suppression. That's the issue. Actually. Voter fraud is a lie. Voter suppression is alive and well. And the truth is, you scratch a lie, you find a thief. The thieves that have stolen elections do not want to deal with this. Yeah.
Reverend, Jeffrey just said something that I hear a lot of Republicans say. Right. When you say voter suppression, they say all they're asking for is the voter ID. In North Carolina, was it only about voter ID?
Right. No, it wasn't. It was about 40 changes. They rolled back same-day registration. They rolled back early voting. They passed the worst form of photo ID, and the court said it was unconstitutional. First of all, I heard Jeffrey say last night, you can buy medicine, you need an ID. First of all, medicine is not a civil right or a constitutional right. Secondly, people do give the last 4 digits. Do you know about the Harvard law? They give the last 4 digits of their Social Security, the last 4 digits of their license. When they do their voter registration, they have to sign their names. It's called signature attestation. You get a felony if you lie, and there has been no cases of this. No cases. This is the same lie that Tom Tillis, when he was Speaker of the House, used to justify the worst voter suppression. He used this same fraudulent researcher, Von Spenvosky, who was proven fraudulent. The courts ruled against him, and even later, Tom Tillis came on and said there really was no voter fraud. We just want to protect the vote. No, this is about voter suppression. This is about trying to suppress the African-American vote. We had 868 less voting sites in the black community in 2016 than we did in 2012. That's what's really going on here.
You want to respond? I have to get to the break, but would you like to respond before we go?
I would just say that voter suppression would mean, among other things, that people who are non-citizens of the United States are voting and suppressing the votes of those who were citizens.
Nope.
That's voter suppression.
That's not true, Jeffrey. That's not true. Voter suppression is when the courts say when you surgically and intentionally suppress African Americans and Latino. I'm not talking about my opinion. I'm talking about court-proven truth. Not the lies of Donald Trump or the lies of the Republican Party, but the courts have ruled unanimously. In our case, 2 white judges and 1 African American that the state engaged in voter suppression, racialized voter suppression, both in the voting and in gerrymandering. They even call the gerrymandering apartheid districting. Yeah. That's what we need to be dealing with and fixing.
Dr. Barber and Jeffrey and
that's why we took them to court.
Stand by. More on the other side of this break. We'll be right back.
All right. So that was courtesy of CNN and MSNBC. Don Lemon and A.M. Joy. We're live here at the Dallas County Courthouse. Voter fraud is alive. Voter suppression is alive. Now we want to hear from some of our very esteemed panelists. Of course, this event is co-sponsored not only by Sirius XM Progress, but by Repairers of the Breach, in the person of Reverend Barber, the Selma Bridge Crossing Jubilee Incorporated, in the persons of Senator Hank Sanders and Fire Rose Sanders Toure. Give them a round of applause for always. And also in forward justice in the person of their legal director, who has been in the fight for voting rights for almost 3 decades. They told me to say that, Penda. I was going to say, maybe 5, because sometimes I've been doing, when they say 30 years to me, that ages me, but you're eternally youthful. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to hear brief opening statements, 5-minute statements from each of our panelists. Ladies, I went to the Women's March, ladies first. Penda Hair, give her a round of applause as she brings her opening statement.
Thank you, Mark, and I think that 30 years is about right. My first voting rights case was in Georgia, and it was when Reverend Jackson was running for president in 1984. And when you talk about voter suppression, it didn't just start with 2008.
That's right.
And just as it started when this country was founded and before, and it has been the long arc of history to suppress the votes, particularly of people of color, former slaves, when after the 15th Amendment was passed, and then coming through the Jim Crow era to the present. So in my first case in Georgia, it was about voter registration, and you could only register to vote.
You mind holding it? That's better.
No problem. You could only register to vote at the courthouse, and the hours were very irregular. If an African American managed to show up in a courthouse outside of Atlanta, the office would just mysteriously close. And that was not in the 1950s. That was in 1984. And that was typical in the South. So let me just briefly say that Forward Justice, the organization that I am a part of, is a nonpartisan law, policy, and strategy center dedicated to advancing racial, social, and economic justice in the U.S. South. And we believe that as the South goes, so goes the nation.
That's right.
And I think Selma is a sacred example of the South leading the nation to its better self. And it is humbling to be here on this hallowed ground. I want to, as a lawyer, I ask myself, what is the evidence? And the question that's been posed here tonight, if you were trying it before a fair jury or a fair judge, it would be a slam dunk. When you look at actual evidence as opposed to tweets or unsubstantiated claims, what I look at is, first, what is the evidence of voter suppression? Well, I define voter suppression as measures that make it, that erect barriers to the vote, and that particularly affect people of color or other people who are marginalized or have a more difficult time participating in the political process. And there are 2 points in recent times that seem to have been sort of marks for increased voter suppression. The first is in 2008, Senator Barack Obama was elected the first African-American president of the United States. And the backlash was immediate. In the North Carolina voter suppression case that I worked on along with others from Forward Justice on behalf of the North Carolina NAACP, the campaign manager of later Governor Pat McCrory did a post-election analysis of the Obama victory, and what he said is that the Obama campaign targeted straight ticket voters, and it made sure they voted early, and that they targeted African American and young voters to increase that turnout, and using same-day registration. That was his analysis. And a couple of years later, the legislature enacted the monster voter suppression law that went after, guess what? Straight ticket voting, early voting, same-day registration, and then just to top it off, the strictest voter ID in the country. And so voter suppression, so then the second point in time is the Shelby decision. The United States Supreme Court in 2013 eviscerated the Voting Rights Act in a decision that Justice Ginsburg, in her dissent, said was throwing out the protections of the Voting Rights Act, the Section 4 and Section 5 pre-clearance protections, were like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you are not getting wet. And post-Shelby, we are all getting very wet.
Yeah.
The instances of barriers that are being erected that particularly affect people of color have multiplied geometrically. And not just in the South, but disproportionately in the South. And we have seen everything from increased voter ID, increased voter challenges, more difficult and onerous voter registration rules, cuts on same-day registration or elimination of same-day registration, and even here in Alabama, a return to strict disenfranchisement of people with felony convictions. And that's happened in other states like Florida and Iowa as well. So that's the evidence of voter suppression. What is the evidence of voter fraud? Well, there have been lots of cases. I participated in some of them. I cannot think of a single court case where a court has found that any barrier to voting is justified by voter fraud. Every single court that has looked at the issue has said there is no voter fraud. And generally what the courts say is that they say that if there is any voter fraud, it's in absentee voting. It's done, that absentee voting is used primarily by whites, and there is a mismatch between the so-called remedies for fraud, which is voter ID for people voting in person, and the place where fraud is most likely to occur, which is absentee voting. And so there is simply no evidence of any kind of fraud that would be in any way addressed by the kinds of barriers that are being erected. And then the third issue really quickly is just what is the evidence of the real motivation of the folks that are, the legislatures that are passing this? Well, I just described what the Republican operative said in North Carolina, and then the court found that the legislature gathered evidence and then wrote a voter ID law that specifically targeted the types of voter ID that African Americans did not have. That was the surgical strike. In Pennsylvania, the majority leader in the legislature announced that voter ID had been passed, and therefore he had delivered the state to then Governor Romney, who was running for president. As far back as the 1980s, Republican operatives were announcing, we don't want everybody to vote. That doesn't help us. And so the evidence, when you line it up, what it shows is there is voter suppression, there is no voter fraud, and the reason that this is being done is racial and political. And those two reasons are intertwined, and race is being used to advance partisan electoral outcomes. And finally, I will just say that I still have hope because the courts are seeing through this. The people are seeing through this and standing up. And I believe that we will achieve the restoration of the Voting Rights Act, and we will keep litigating and agitating until we do. Thank you.
All right, Penda Hair, Forward Justice, Legal Director. Thank you, Penda. Here with us now also, again, the Selma Bridge Crossing Jubilee. This annual commemoration, the only annual commemoration of a civil rights action is right here in Selma. And it has been a sacred event, one organized by two lawyers who were also lovebirds at Harvard University, representing the best of us coming back home to build this movement and sustain this commemoration in tribute to the history and the struggle of our ancestors. He is a state senator. He's been buked and he's been scorned. He's been talked about sure as you're born, but Hank has always stood strong, steadfast, and never wavered, and he's done it for us. To hear his opening remarks, his 5-minute opening remarks, please, a rousing round of applause for Senator Hank Sanders.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Reverend Barber, for initiating this. I was a student at Talladega College in the spring of 1965. And we drove from Talladega College, which is 80 miles north of Montgomery, and came down to St. Jude City, which then was outside of Montgomery, but now it's a part of Montgomery. And we marched the last leg of the march in. And the most powerful memory I have is Dr. King saying, "How long?" And the crowd saying, "Not long." I came away from there convinced that in no time at all that voting rights would be fully implemented. And I had, in my wildest dreams, I could not conceive of being here 45 years later. Well, I came to Selma in 1971. We agreed to come and spend 5 years. We felt that somehow the implementation of voting rights was going to change everything. I couldn't conceive in any kind of way of being here 46 years later fighting the same fight. Now, I really should have known better, because I came in the fall of 1966. I came to Lowndes County to help try to elect some black people, and the county was over 75% black. We didn't succeed in electing a single person. So I should have had some sense of what we were up against, but I didn't. But the United States Congress and the President of the United States Congress misjudged it just as well. Section 5 was put in for 7 years, from 65 to 72. And not much progress had been made in 72. So it was extended for 10 years to 82. By 82, it still was just a dent in the bucket. And it was extended for 25 years. And even then, in 2006, getting ready for 2007, it needed to be extended again. In 2012, I went to vote, and my name wasn't on there. I gave them my ID, but they say, "Your name is not on the list." And I said, "But I voted here every single time." And they said, "Well, we know you. Let's call the board of registrars." They called the board of registrars, and they said, "His name is not on the list." The persons in the office knew me directly, because I had worked closely with people that worked with them. And I said, and so they then put me on the phone, and I talked to them about it. They said, "You must have moved." I said, "I've been here since 1988. 1978. I've been here since 1978. And then I said, "I haven't moved." They said, "Well, we sent you something and you didn't send it back." I said, "You haven't sent me anything, and I did not send back." And so I got mad and decided that I wasn't going to vote. I was going to protest. But I had worked hard for the issue, and I decided, what if it loses by one vote? So I went ahead and voted, not a challenge ballot, what you call them now? A provisional ballot, and which they didn't count, whatever. And here I was, one, having lived in the same place. Yes, sir. Two, having voted in every election. Three, having run at least 8 times, more than 8 times, and a state senator in a county where the people there knew me, they all knew me. But what I would like to say very quickly is voter suppression did not just start recently.
That's right.
Voter suppression has been going on all along. U.S. Attorney Jeff Sessions was doing voter suppression in 1984 and 85 and 86. White people were winning elections in predominantly black counties. Perry County was one example. And we complained about them misusing and illegally using absentee ballot. We couldn't get them to respond at all. We even sent Albert Turner, and I believe his brother Robert Turner, to the United States Justice Department to meet with, I believe it was Meese was the U.S. Attorney. They said, we can't do anything about it. Y'all have to learn to use absentee ballot. So we came back, and I did training so that they would be able to do it legally. And soon as we start having some success with it, then the ones who said they couldn't do anything about it issued 70-some indictments against Albert Turner and Evelyn Turner. And that was designed to chill the right to vote. Yes. That was voter suppression. So we've been having it all along. When Jeff Sessions lost that, he and some other U.S. attorneys brought 212 cases, and they lost every one of them because they didn't have a case. But they knew that whether they had a case or not, they could really stop people from voting because people would be scared to use absentee ballot or use any other kind of ballot. So we had a tremendous challenge on our hand. And I just want to jump forward. In 2000, I believe it's 2011, they passed a voter ID bill here in Alabama. And they didn't even give us a chance to debate it. They brought it up, cut off debate, and passed it without us having to be able to say a word on it. And but they did not submit it to the U.S. Justice Department. They held it until after the 2013 decision where the Supreme Court had gutted Section 5. Right. But then a couple of years ago, a year and something ago, the state of Alabama, a lot of people really don't want to get voter ID. They want to get a driver's license. Here in Alabama, they went and closed the driver's license office in 28 counties, in 32 locations in 28 counties. Wow. So if you got to go to another county to get a driver's license to be able to vote, that creates all kinds of problems. So they just keep coming at it one way after another, and one way after another, and one way after another. And we have to find ways to be able to counter that. I noticed that Reverend Barber said that it had disenfranchised 100,000 votes. We have statistics that say that it might be several 100,000 votes that have been disenfranchised by voter photo ID. You know, whenever you start asking them, say, why do we need photo ID? I said, every time I voted, I would go in, they'd ask me my name, they'd find it on the list, they'd strike it off, and I would vote and sign it. How could somebody vote twice if the name has already been struck off? And whenever you ask them about the voter fraud, they can't come up with an example. The voter fraud is being done by them in the name of voter protection. And finally, let me just say that I want to express a special appreciation for the intense, extended, continuous effort that Reverend Barber is waging on this. He has become perhaps the most effective spokesperson against voter suppression in the whole United States. And he has correctly identified that voter fraud is alive and well. Yeah. But I said that was the last thing, and I'm going to make this the last one.
Voter suppression, not voter fraud.
Yeah, that's right. I just want to say this. The right to vote is the one right that protects every other right.
That's right, that's right.
So when you look at it, after slavery, you had the 13th Amendment that ended slavery. Then you had the 14th Amendment that provided equal rights. And then you had the 15th Amendment that provided the right to vote. In the 60s, in the second Reconstruction, you had a series of laws, and eventually you had the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And the last one again was the 1965 Voting Rights Act.
That's right.
It's always the last one to give because it's the most important one, and it's the one that protects every other right. But now we are under a very sustained attack, and every one of us have to find a way to fight. If we don't, we're going to find ourselves in the same position that happened after the first Reconstruction. Right. We'll be without the right to vote.
That's right. Senator Hank Sanders, give him a round of applause. We're live in Selma from the Dallas County Courthouse. Voter fraud is a lie. Voter suppression is a lie. Repeat after me. Voter fraud is a lie.
Voter fraud is a lie.
Voter suppression is alive.
Voter suppression is a lie.
So appreciate his patience. We've already been on an hour. Can you believe that? It went by fast, didn't it? People ask me, how you do a three-hour radio show a day? It goes by that quickly. It feels like 15 minutes. Our next guest has been on the phone since we began. I hope it hadn't felt too long. I hope it hasn't felt like an hour for him either. But he's one of the foremost scholars and researchers on this topic. And we appreciate the work. He has been on the front lines writing about this, documenting it, and we need people doing that very, very important work. He is a regular columnist for thenation.com, but also the author of the seminal work, Give Us the Ballot, the Modern Struggle for Voting Rights in America. Please give a round of applause to Ari Berman, joining us by telephone. Ari, my brother, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
He just like, can everybody hear Ari? All right. Ari, have at it, man. The floor is yours. Your perspective in terms of what we're talking about tonight, voter fraud versus voter suppression.
So I'm with you guys in spirit, and I'm sorry that I couldn't be there. Selma is a really special place, and I was there for the 2013 and the 2015 Jubilee, and in fact, the first scene in my book, Give Us the Ballot, is when President Obama, 100 members of Congress, and 100,000 people came to Selma in March of 2015 to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, which was a really, really powerful moment. So I wrote really hundreds of stories about voter suppression during the 2016 election, and I just want to share one story that really stuck with me to contrast the voter suppression that we're seeing with the voter fraud that has been manufactured. So I wrote a story about a 58-year-old African-American man named Eddie Lee Holloway Jr., who moved from Illinois to Wisconsin in 2008, had never had any problems voting, and needed to get a Wisconsin photo ID because Wisconsin was one of those states that had a strict voter ID law. So he took his Illinois photo ID, his birth certificate, and his Social Security card with him to get a photo ID for voting. But he was rejected at the DMV in Milwaukee because the name on his birth certificate said Eddie Jr. Holloway instead of Eddie Lee Holloway Jr. because of a clerical error when it was issued. They said he had to go downtown to Vital Records in Milwaukee and get his birth certificate changed. He went down to Vital Records in Milwaukee and he said, "How much will it cost to amend my birth certificate?" They told him between $400 and $600. They said he had to go to Illinois, where he was from, to amend his birth certificate there. So he went, he was unemployed at the time, but he paid for a bus to Illinois, and he went to the Vital Records Division in Illinois, in the state capital of Springfield, and he said, "I want to amend my birth certificate." In Illinois, they told him he had to get a copy of his high school and his vaccination records to be able to do this. So then he went from Springfield, state capital, to Decatur, where he was from, got his high school records, came back to Springfield, the state capital, went back to Vital Records, and said, "I want to amend my birth certificate." And they said that he needed to bring his full Social Security statement which he didn't have on him. So he went all the way back to Wisconsin. He got all his documents in order. He contacted Illinois Vital Records, and he said, can I email or fax you my information? They said, no, you have to go back and appear in person again to do this. And at this point, Eddie Lee Holloway Jr. gave up. He'd spent $200 of his own money. He'd visited 2 states. He'd made 7 trips to different public agencies, and he still couldn't vote in Wisconsin. And I was in Wisconsin on Election Day, and I called his lawyer from the ACLU, and I asked his lawyer, did Eddie Lee Holloway ever get the voter ID that he needed to be able to vote in Wisconsin? And his lawyer told me he got so fed up, he moved back to Illinois. And so there really are thousands of stories like this. And it's interesting because 300,000 registered voters in Wisconsin didn't have strict forms of government-issued ID that were required. Donald Trump only won the state by 20,000 votes. When Wisconsin tried to defend its voter ID law in federal court, they didn't show a single case of voter impersonation that a voter ID law would have stopped. So you had potentially 300,000 voters disenfranchised and not a single case of voter fraud that this law would have stopped. And people have been asking me all the time, did voter suppression have an impact on the election? And I think absolutely it had an impact on the election. You just have to look at what happened in Wisconsin and what happened in North Carolina, where they cut early voting and eliminated polling places, or what happened when there were 900 fewer polling places throughout the South. But I think even if voter suppression had no impact on the election, the fact that one party deliberately made it harder to vote was a huge scandal that deserved far more public attention. Reverend Barber mentioned earlier that the attack on voting rights was the most undercovered issue of the 2016 election. And that's what I wrote in a column the day after the election, pointing out that there were 25 presidential debates and not a single question about the gutting of the Voting Rights Act. And I think the unfortunate situation is that far too many of my colleagues in the media viewed the attack on voting rights as a fringe issue instead of the most fundamental issue in the election. And we're still in the situation today where people want to come to Selma. People like Jeff Sessions want to come to Selma. People like John Merrill want to come to Selma, and they want to talk about all the progress that we've made. And we've absolutely made a lot of progress. But they don't want to acknowledge that voter suppression didn't end in 1965, that voter suppression didn't end on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, that in fact it spread from places like Alabama to places like Wisconsin. And if anything, that was an argument for expanding the Voting Rights Act to give people more protection, not to take those crucial protections away. So I think we're really at an incredibly important moment. I believe that Donald Trump is the greatest threat to democracy in our lifetime, and I think that we need to think about defending democracy on all fronts, not just the right to vote, but the right to a free press, the right to an independent judiciary, the right to have our elections held without being hacked by a foreign power. All of these things are connected. And I think now is the time, if there's ever going to be a time since 1965, to reinvigorate the voting rights movement in this country, to reinvigorate the pro-democracy movement in this country. It's going to be now because of all the attacks we're facing. So I'm really grateful that I could phone in. I'm really sorry that I can't be here, but I really want to commend Senator Sanders, Reverend Barber, Penda, and Mark, and everyone else for the work you're doing down there.
Ari, thank you. Give Ari a round of applause. Ari, I know you don't have long to spend. You're welcome to stay on the line to hear Reverend Barber's next presentation. You can't see it, and the radio audience can't. But behind him are some maps, and he looks like he's going to be the Al Roker of voting rights. That's right. He's going to show us where voter suppression and how voting rights impacts this map. I'm going to let's try to describe it as best we can for the radio audience. That's right. Since they can't see it. But Reverend Barber, please take it away.
Is Ari still on?
Yeah, is Ari still there? Are still there?
Because I heard him
Still
say,
here, yeah.
Did you
Okay,
say
good.
45 debates or 25?
No, 26 debates.
26, that's right. I wanted to make sure I had. But did you all hear him say Trump won by less than 20,000 votes in Wisconsin, but probably 300,000? And that's not been a major story. And treating voting rights like a fringe issue, or though it's just hurting black people, it's targeted at black people and brown people and poor people, but it destroys the very heart and soul of America in many, many ways. And that story, I leaned over to Penda, the 95-year-old lady that was forced because of our voter ID law until we got it overturned, was forced to search out one, traveled over 200 miles. And she had been voting since she was 21 after she had been forced to read the preamble of the Constitution backwards. And in her lifetime, she had registered over 5,000 people to vote. And yet at 90-some years old, she was forced to have to go try to obtain a photo ID because of some glitch with the way in which her maiden name and her current name is just wrong. It's just what Isaiah says, woe unto those who legislate evil. Isaiah chapter 10, and rob the poor of their rights. But I want us to see something here. And audience, what I have here are maps that talk about poverty rate, states without living wages, states that lack Medicaid expansion, child poverty, voter suppression laws, and where the percentage of so-called evangelicals are. This group, white evangelicals, that is really a form of heresy, because they claim the only issues we ought to be concerned about is if you're against the homosexual community, if you're against abortion, and against prayer in the school, and for property rights and gun rights. And none of that is even in the top 1,000 of what Jesus focused on. None of it. In fact, it's not even there are 3,000 scriptures in the Bible about how to treat the poor, the least of these, women, children, and the strangers. And most of the things that the so-called white evangelicals who gave all their support, many of them, to Donald Trump, most of the things they talk about, it's not even scripture to support it. And the places they do use scripture, they misinterpret them because there's no scripture that says you are required to hate your neighbor and treat people without respect. I wanted to show you something, because this voting rights piece, Mark and Senator Sanders, we've got to help folk understand we can't work in silos anymore. If you're concerned about education or living wages or union rights or LGBTQ rights or the environment or criminal justice reform, then voting rights has to be at the top of your agenda, and fighting voter suppression. Now let me show you what I mean. This is a map on poverty. Wherever you see the dark purple and the more purple means that there is at least 17% poverty in those states. At least 17% poverty, and where it's darker, more than 20%. Now that's among all people. When you disaggregate that by race, the numbers go up 30 and someplace nearly 50%. Nearly 50% in these areas. Now watch this, I'm gonna show you something. This map shows all the states where you have light color where there is no living wage. Where there's no living wage. A living wage is, the minimum wage would be $20 an hour if it had kept pace with inflation. And living wages don't hurt business, because when people have more disposable income, they spend money and it actually spurs business. It's a lie of the greedy, because we have 400 families in this country that make an average of $97,000 an hour. While we are locking up people who make $15 an hour. Joseph Stiglitz, a Nobel Peace economist, has written a book called The Price of Inequality. You ought to read that book. He talks about what it costs this country when we do not do right by the poor. Well, look, all of these are states without living wages, and these states, look, Alabama, Mississippi, all across here, Georgia, South Carolina, Tennessee, are the states with no minimum wage, or the minimum wage is less than the federal wage, according to this map. And these are the states where there's no living wage. Now watch where we're going. If you come over here, these are all the states that refuse to expand Medicaid. When you hear Ryan and them talking about the system is collapsing, it didn't collapse in the system. They would not follow the system. it's not collapsing. More people are getting in. But in all of these states, people would be covered, working poor people, veterans, many of them, by Medicaid expansion in these states. But these states have refused to expand Medicaid as of 1/1/2017. That means in these states, more than 8 million people are being denied Medicaid expansion. More than 8, and 6 out of 10 black people live in these states. You see them? And all of the southern states, where you have the highest level of need of health care among poor whites. See, Medicaid expansion, like in North Carolina, we are denying 500,000 people expansion, but 346,000 of them are white. And even here in Alabama, there would be more poor whites that would receive health care through Affordable Care Act than blacks, but they've been bamboozled because they call it Obamacare, and that's like it used to be calling something communist. It's a code word. That's why the other day there was a video where a guy was on saying he hated Obamacare, and the person interviewing him said, well, what kind of health care do you have? He said, I got the Affordable Care Act, but I hate. It's a trick. But I want you to look at the maps now. Look at the lack of Medicaid. Look at the poverty rate. Look at the states with the no minimum wage, the minimum wage that doesn't come up to the federal level or is lower or no living wage. This map is child poverty. Where it's dark, it means that more than 24% of the children are poor. Now that's all children. So if 24% of the children are poor, upwards of nearly 50% of black children are poor. Now, Clinton, who's helped me with this, and Erica, we have this thing we show. If you lay each of these maps on top of each other, and then lay where the voter suppression is going on, it's the same states. The same states where you have voter suppression, you have high rates of poverty, you have a lack of living wage, you have the lack of Medicaid expansion, and high rates of child poverty. Same states. The connection between wherever you have voter suppression, you are electing regressive candidates that will not support the programs that we know lift people out of poverty, will not support $15 in the union and living wages, will not address child poverty, and will not pass health care. In fact, are trying to repeal health care. Now here's the last map that'll mess you up. If you lay this map on top of all these maps, this is the one about Protestant evangelicalism, right? So-called people of faith. Now I'm an evangelical. I'm a theologically evangelical, liberal, conservative, charismatic, liberationist biblicist. I don't know nothing about that means I know Jesus for myself. That's what that means. And I know Jesus is a God of love and justice and mercy and lifting the poor and gave free health care to everybody he met. But this group is the people that claim they know Jesus. Now you lay this map, what you find out, Mark, is all these states have more than so-called 50%, either 50% or more people who claim to be Christian. But they're the same state that are suppressing the vote. There's some heresy going on. There's some same states that have high poverty rates, the lack of living wages, high child poverty rates, and the lack of Medicaid expansion. And when you see these maps, lastly, you see the interconnection and why we have to have a unified movement and why we're going to try to take this on the road and why I want to know if you get a call that we need Alabama to take 2 days in Washington, D.C. and sit in some offices, even if they arrest you, will you come? That's what we need to know. Because this shows that wherever, lastly, Mark, you have voter suppression and a misteaching of faith, wherever you put those two things together, you're going to have politicians and others that are all right with high levels of poverty, high levels of low wages, high levels of the lack of health care, and high levels of child poverty. Now, if you flip this in these same states, if you register 30% of the black voters in these states,
in these southern states,
southern states alone, because there's 171 electoral votes right here. If you register 30% of the black voters, and there's no voter suppression or limited voter suppression, and connect them with progressive whites and Latinos, these states shift. They're no longer solid South.
Yeah.
And if they're no longer solid South, it breaks up
The
this
whole
whole
thing.
map.
Then there's something, folks. Give her a round of applause. Ari, we're live at the Dallas County Courthouse. Talking about votes. Ari, you still there? I know you got to go in a minute. You still there? I want to ask you one question before you go.
I'm still here, yeah.
So Ari, it just seems to me, and then we're going to hear from Penda and Hank in our last half hour, as what Reverend Barber just described. Most egregious voter suppression laws correspond to the states where there's high child poverty, high poverty rate overall, states without living wage, and lack of Medicaid expansion, as well as this Protestant evangelicalism. Now, Ari, the argument we heard that allowed Trump to win, and even crossed over and appeared to some of Bernie's voters, was that these were whites concerned about their wages and their economy and some of the things that they struggle with. So it seems to me, Ari, is my theory correct that if everybody, including whites who are under the influence of some of this Protestant evangelicalism or misled, misbiblicized, as Reverend Barber would say, if they understood how if voter suppression was eradicated, some of those problems that they were complaining about in this election would also be eradicated. Right, Ari?
I think that's true. And I think, it's enticing to believe that people who voted for Trump were motivated by the economy.
Yeah, right. It's true.
But I think we'd be very naive if we didn't acknowledge that race was a big part of what was going on.
Yeah.
That the voter suppression efforts that we're seeing now, they're not new, but they dramatically accelerated after President Obama's election.
Yeah.
That when we had record turnout of progressive whites and of young people and of women and of people of color, that sent shockwaves through the Republican Party. And when they saw what Reverend Barber and others were doing in states like North Carolina, they felt extremely threatened by it. And I think they felt like if Barack Obama was going to be able to pass the torch to somebody who was once again elected with that coalition, who would get to have a progressive majority on the Supreme Court for the first time in 50 years and really be able to cement some of President Obama's achievements, that could really be the death of conservatism.
Yeah.
And so I think that the fact that voter suppression has been so rampant shows that the vote is powerful and that people feel threatened by it. But it also means that you can't just be complacent about the changing demographics. You can't just assume that the demographics are going to translate into political power, because there are so many people that are out there trying to thwart the power of the electorate so that it doesn't translate into the kind of results that it should.
Yeah.
Mark, can I say 30 seconds?
Wait 30 seconds, Zach.
Okay.
Let argue.
In the top 10, 12 of the poorest states are in the South, where they are continuing to elect candidates that are the most adverse to the things that would help the poor. But the poison in the well is the bamboozlement of many white voters to make them think that the poor people and the people without living wages are lazy black and brown people, when in fact there are 8 million more poor whites than there are blacks.
Right.
And that's what we got to cut through, that voting rights is not just a black issue. It's targeted at black people so that black and whites and Latinos cannot form fusion coalitions and change the political map.
And it's a hell of a thing that racism can make you think you ain't poor. And you sitting up as poor as me. Now, we're going to go to the state capitol Montgomery tomorrow as we let Ari go. And what did he say? That's one of his greatest speeches. We always get fed, I have a dream.
Right.
But he talked about class. And he said, a black preacher, Martin Luther King, said, during Reclamation, after Reconstruction, black folk were fed the Bible and white folk were fed Jim Crow.
That's right.
Now, you just heard a white scholar say to us, it is naive to think this is all about wages, as Trump says, wages and jobs and TPP, sequester. But We're naive. We know it's about race. Ari, I know you got a hard out, man. Let's give Ari Berman a round of applause for being a good sport and being on the phone. Give us the ballot, the modern struggle for voting rights. Ari, thank you, man. Love you, buddy. And we'll talk to you soon. Okay. Penda Hair. Hank Sanders with us. I want to pose a question. If we have time, we'll try to get a question, too, from the audience. How significant is it now, Penda, in this fight, that Jefferson Davis Sessions has ordered the Justice Department? By the way, if these on news, I do a news show, I got to report the news. James Comey has requested the Department of Justice to inform Donald Trump that he was not, in fact, wiretapped. Woo! That just happened tonight. Husband found out his wife was cheating and confronted her. The wife went on Facebook and said, "My husband must have a secret camera in the house." She didn't deny the cheating. So if I say you meeting with the Russians, and then you say you must have me wiretapped, that's not a denial, that's a confirmation. So you deny it first. You don't say, "How does he know if I must be wiretapped?" Article just came out. He has been on a rampage all weekend, terrorizing his whole staff, just obsessed. The man's not well. So that's true. You can see it. I mean, I got to just report the news. Comey himself said, "Y'all, we can't do this. Y'all got to talk to the man. Ain't no wiretapping going on." But this same Justice Department, and it is something that this first time in history, Penda, legally, that the Attorney General who heads the Department of Justice, while being confirmed and while being sworn in, is being investigated on the floor below him in his very Justice Department. I've never seen anything like it. So what does it mean for him, and Sherilyn Ifill, who couldn't be with us tonight, talked about this, and stood up for him, Barber, when he left the church today in dealing with the Secretary of State. What does it mean for the Attorney General of the Department of Justice to decree or order that they're no longer going to resist in court Texas voter ID? And what, we got all these different things going on in states. What are the implications of what Texas is doing on the other cases we have out here and on North Carolina and everything else? Please, Penda Hair.
Yes. It is definitely devastating to have an Attorney General who will shape the Justice Department Civil Rights Division and the voting section of that Civil Rights Division to be against voting rights. And under the Obama administration, under both Attorney General Holder and Attorney General Lynch, the Department of Justice has been very aggressive at protecting voting rights, especially since the Shelby decision, both by using the public airwaves and making public pronouncements, providing guidance, and by coming into cases such as the Texas voter ID case and the North Carolina monster voter suppression cases. And when the Justice Department comes into a case, it brings both credibility and resources. And the cases are very expensive and labor intensive. So it will be a loss of that resource and that partner from the federal government. But more than that, they won't just go away and not bring their resources. They're going to be on the other side. They have switched sides in Texas. They have for 4 years claimed and proven in court that the Texas voter ID law was enacted with racial intent.
But wait, Penn, I want to be clear. They're not just going to step away. They're going to actually move and argue for the other side.
Yes, that's what they are. That is what they are doing in Texas, or suggesting that they will do in Texas, and that is what the record of Attorney General Sessions suggests that he will do, and what his prior statements and his prior actions suggest that is what they will do. And lawyers are leaving the voting section and the Civil Rights Division and the Department of Justice overall in droves.
Yeah. And thank you, Penda Hair, Forward Justice. Now, and Reverend Barber and I were talking about this on the phone the other day. He met with the Russian ambassador twice and lied about it. The Russian ambassador, Hank Sanders, did not tell Jeff Sessions to suppress the vote. That's who Jeff Sessions is. That ain't gonna do it. He was doing that anyway. Am I correct? So, Senator Sanders, please come back to you and share with us what you think ought to be some of our next steps in combating voter suppression, and also in terms of what we ought to be doing with Jeff Sessions. We have sent him a letter.
The letter went Thursday, had over 4,000 hits, signatures within 24 hours, over 500 clergy and 3,500 faith activists across this country demanding that he make a public statement saying he wants the full restoration of the Voting Rights Act, and if he doesn't, we need to deal with him in a very strong way through civil disobedience and nonviolence.
Senator Hank Sanders, you concur with this strategy, obviously, and just how important is that we continue to hold your former senator's feet to the fire?
It's extremely important. A lot of people are concerned about the laws that will be passed. A lot of people are concerned about various official actions that will be taken. I am concerned about those things, but I'm more concerned about the messages that get sent. So when the messages get sent that you can do anything you want to and nothing is going to be done about it, then you have all of these individuals acting at various levels. You have other officials acting at various levels. And so you have all of these things coming at you all at once. And there's not the resources to be able to deal with them. So we have this underlying white supremacy that's still at work here in this country. And we have this deep and profound belief that black people probably ought not to be voting. And it's widespread. And whenever it starts to bubble up and take roots and start to grow and cultivate, then it can continue to grow and grow and grow. And that worries me as much as any action that laws people can pass or things that they may do. And that is why it becomes so critical that we have the kind of leadership we have in Reverend Barber. It becomes so critical that we begin to really focus on this, because it's like a big train sitting on a hill, and when the train starts moving, it's moving real slow. So if you then get in front of it and stop it, you can stop it. But once it pick up speed, there's no way to be able to stop it. That gives an urgency for all of us. We all have to put our hands on the train in whatever way we can to see if we can't stop it before it pick up that kind of speed and roll over us.
Senator Hank Sanders.
Mark, can I make... And I want the national audience tonight to hear something. We can see it, and those by live stream. You've had two white scholars and two African Americans both talk about white supremacy. I want you to get that. It's not just black people up here saying, you can actually be black these days and be in support of white supremacy. Tim Scott is a senator from South Carolina, and he has not called for the restoration of the Voting Rights Act, and the Voting Rights Act covers South Carolina. I want you to hear that. So today, when we talk about racism, it's not, the Klan, we know that's racism, and David Duke, that's racism. But systemic racism is about policy that is deliberately and deliberately designed to disenfranchise people based on race, but it doesn't just hurt black people, it hurts everybody and our ability to build these coalitions. And what Brother Hankins said about this train, this thing is serious. When you don't have Section 5 pre-clearance, I didn't know this till they taught me how to be a lawyer on every other Thursday. Right. And that's because we had to learn, because listen what they did. They passed this law. It took us 3 years. They spent what Hank is saying, we don't have the reason. They spent $6 million If it hadn't been for a pro bono law firm and for Penda Hair bringing lawyers, I don't even know where she found them. They just came free. They just said wanted to fight. She found the money. And a pro bono corporate law firm that wanted to do something just said, we want to fight them because they're wrong. If it hadn't been for that, Mark, we couldn't have matched. We've been in the streets, but we couldn't have matched $6 million tax dollars that was spent to defend an unconstitutional law. And I learned in the courtroom, I didn't know this. See, one of the advantages of Section 5 is it says you can't retrogress. In other words, if you pass a law like same-day registration and early voting, you can't get the majority in the body and just because you want to, you take it away. Now, you might prevent some things from being passed, but you can't take away. Without pre-clearance, they attempted to take away. We used same-day registration early voting for 2 election cycles, and it worked. And then, after Section 5 was nullified, they sought to retrogress.
Yeah.
We need to understand how deep this is and how serious this is. This is our Selma. It's not just about remembering the Selma of 65. This fight is our Selma.
Yeah, they want to put us back on the cross again. Yeah. They want to nail us to us again. Reverend Barber, before you put your microphone down, just so we're clear, because it's time, it's other hours almost up. We're almost done. So I'm going to try to get to the audience, but while Reverend Barber still has a mic, and I don't want this to get away from us, lay out for us again specifically what the next steps are based upon Attorney General Jeff Sessions' response or non-response, and precisely what we're going to be doing. Please.
Well, the 2 strategies that Repairers is working on with people like the Cairo Center out of Union and Tracy Blackman, some of you all may know, and others, and that is, first of all, to address this, we've got to change the narrative. And we believe we need a national moral revival, poor people's, poor children campaign that begins on the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's A Time to Break Silence speech, and then goes on through 218 that engages and writes an agenda that's interconnected around voting rights, poverty, criminal justice reform, health care, environmental justice, and equal protection under the law, that we will engage in 2018 in state capitals and in the nation's capital using all the tools of our movement, including civil disobedience. We think we've got to change the narrative. We have to make it so that the issue of poverty becomes an issue on the ballot. It becomes an issue in our discussion because we are committing attention violence against the poor. Secondly, based on this response, we have faith leaders who are saying it is time for us to go inside the Congress and sit in the offices of Ryan and McConnell because the Speaker and the Senate leaders have the power to call a hearing on voting and to release it and to have it voted on. Trump isn't doing this. It was Boehner and Ryan and McConnell that for over 3 years, for over 1,349 days today, have held up a vote on full restoration of the Voting Rights Act. They are more dangerous in some ways than Trump because he can sign an executive order. Now, of course, he's got the nuclear codes that makes him, but they can pass legislation. And that's the thing that's happening right now underneath the tweets. We better be watching what this Congress is passing because the tweets become a distraction. You hear what I'm saying? And the reason I say this, Mark, is because in the Moral Monday movement, you remember when Dr. King said the one thing you got to get a fear over is the jail? Remember that, Hank? I wasn't around, but you all heard it. We found out people have to get over their fear of these state houses and the Congress because people think you can't protest in there. If you do, they're going to arrest. Like in South Carolina, they claim there's a felony. We're going to have to test these laws. If lobbyists can bring charts inside of the Congress, why can't we bring protest placards? If lobbyists can sit in a congressman's office all day and wait on a meeting, why can't we sit in there all day and all night? That's how the people's house. But it's been made to be so, I don't know, it's like it's so glorified And people say, well, that's the Congress. And so what they do is they hide in there. And we're outside rallying, and they're looking at it, eating peanuts and drinking stuff, and say, well, they'll go home. We have got to have something, freedom singers, in this era where we do not easily go home. We need our own 100 days. Our own 100 days of direct action. And we need the old brothers and sisters to suit up one more time. We need the young brothers and sisters to suit up for the first time. And we need the middle-aged folk who are the beneficiaries of the old folk to suit up, period.
Okay, let me do this. I'm going to try to do this in not a lot of time. I need to make a few acknowledgments because we always run out of time and I don't get to make announcements. Those of you in the listening audience, Sirius XM Progress, we're live from the Dallas County Courthouse. Want to thank our impromptu singers tonight. Reverend Uzel was here singing earlier. Charlie Nesbitt, one of the original Freedom Singers, is here. The mother of Eric Garner is here as well, and we appreciate them. Want to thank the volunteers and organizers with Forward Justice and Repairers of the Breach. Give them a round of applause. Reverend Barber's staff, give them a round of applause. My staff from Sirius XM, both back in the studio, Ron Daniels, Dr. Ron Daniels, the illustrious Ron Daniels, wish he could be here. He's in the studio holding it down for us along with my producer, Matt Tomasetti. Gino Balassi is here, and John Gentile, but it's spelled Gentile, Reverend Barber. John Gentile's over here. And last but not least, Dr. Rosalind Jeffries is here with her husband, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, two of our most preeminent African scholars. Leonard Jeffries' grandfather was lynched by the Ku Klux Klan in 1901, 1917. This is the 100th anniversary of his grandfather's lynching. Well, I don't know if you applaud for that, but was lynched by the Ku Klux Klan 100 years ago in Georgia. All right, so we lift him and his family up in prayer. Let me try. Oh, Southern Poverty Law Center is here as well, right here. Raise your hand. They tweeting away on the phone. They just on the phone, just fingers going 100 miles an hour since we've been here. Let me try to get a question from each. We got 3 sections. I think I can try to get 1 question from each section. So raise your hand. Who over here has a question on this side? Nobody? I'm moving quick. No questions over here? Okay, well, let me go to the middle then. Sir, what's your quick question? Not a speech now, just a quick question.
T.J. Smith, published author. Dr. Barber, this session has been extremely helpful. What can we do to keep this movement alive?
Great. We need, number one,
microphone, Barber.
We need everybody online, by live stream, on the radio, and in this room to sign up. If you're in this room, you need to sign up, give us your email so you can get on the correspondence. And when you hear the call, you'll know what's going on. Secondly, we need you to, if you're not in here, go to Repairers of the Breach, sign up for our constant contact. We are building out a movement across the country. And the first thing is for us to be connected, And then lastly, when the call comes, and when there's a need for folk to stand up in Alabama or some here and also to come to D.C., we need people that won't just talk about it, but they'll be about it. Because we've tried requesting and we've tried negotiation and all those things. We are in a situation now, we've got to force this onto the national narrative. This is our Selma again.
Yeah. Want to acknowledge Pastor Kenny Glasgow here. Reverend Sharpton's baby brother. Give him a round of applause. Question?
50 years ago, anniversary, Reverend, can you give some response to what Barack Obama said in Cleveland when he left here in the 50th anniversary about compulsory voting? He said that compulsory voting would transform democracy. How do compulsory, required voting in response to gerrymandering? Can you give me?
Compulsory voting.
Well, first of all, in a democracy, you have to be careful about that. But what I do know, what we need is we need automatic registration at 18 years of age. If you can
That's what we need.
Drafted at 18, we need a constitutional federal amendment protecting the right to vote, because right now it's only protected in state constitutions, and we need some kind of universal standard for voting across the United States so that it's not up to individual states based on their whims and based on who's elected. And then in our hearts, we need to have compulsory voting, because every time we vote, we need to remember that that vote has been baptized in blood and dipped in blood.
That's right.
And
That's right. No, that's right. It's a good point. I also don't want to forget, he was hiding back in the back. He's so humble. But one of the leaders of this movement is the Reverend Bernard Lafayette. He was one of the first here on the ground in Selma. He and his lovely wife are here. And she's looking regal. Love you both. Thank you for your sacrifice. Bernard, hold it. Kid, I acknowledge you had a question? Real quick.
So real quick, we brought together to we're here. They can vote out of prison, and we've been going to jails everywhere. Me and William Boyd actually started the Backwards March of 2007, been doing it, so nobody won't be left behind. What I'm asking you tonight is, I see it that we should merge all that together, but I'm asking you, Reverend Barber, to officialize it, so therefore it can be done, because we don't need to leave without everybody having their rights restored.
30 seconds, Reverend Barber, quickly.
Roz Pellis, stand up. Roz Pellis is a tremendous organizer. If you're interested in the merger tonight and you're leading, see her, because we're getting ready to go back to Highlander and have a serious time of merger. We got to put aside organizational egos and pick up a unified fight to secure our voting rights.
The judge whose courtroom this is here. Collins Pettaway, the Honorable Collins Pettaway is here. Your Honor, gotta acknowledge the judge. I want to thank all of you for being here. This has been a tremendous experience. Reverend Barber, we leave anybody out in terms of acknowledgement?
All of them.
Give yourselves a round of applause. Website where people can follow up. Repairsofthebreach.com, breachrepairs.org, breachrepairs.org, breachrepairs.org. Slow walk to Montgomery in the morning, slow ride to Montgomery. All right, if all minds are clear, it has been made plain. Thank you all for being here. Give our panelists a round of applause. Hank Sanders, William Barber, Penda Hair, Ari Berman. God bless you all from Selma.
I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Yes, I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Oh, I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Hallelujah. 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 Yes, I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Yes, I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah.
Seconds.